Thank you for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. At least 50 people are dead and more than 200 are injured following a shooting at a Las Vegas concert. Police say the shooter is dead, but right now they're releasing few other details. CBN's Jenna Browder is on this story.
What started as a country music concert turned into a bloody massacre overnight. Get down! Get down! The shooting happened near the Mandalay Bay Casino.
My buddy's like, I just got hit, and got hit 3 times, and then people started diving for the ground, and it just continued, and it was pretty much chaotic.
Witnesses reported hearing hundreds of shots.
We refused to believe it was a shooting until it just kept going and going, and then Chase and Aldine left the stage, and then everybody started fleeing.
SWAT teams were sent to the resort, clearing out the 29th floor and working their way up.
Through investigation and response, we determined there was a shooter on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay. Officers responded to that location and engaged the suspect at that location. He is dead currently. He has been identified. He is a local resident. I will not release his name at this time.
Police were trying to track down this woman, Mary Lou Danley, thought to be the gunman's roommate. Off-duty police officers are among the dead. 2 more officers were also hurt. An ISIS propaganda video targeting Las Vegas was released in May, but as the investigation began, no one could say what was behind this deadly mass shooting. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
2 more attacks in 2 different countries reported over the weekend. In Edmonton, Canada, disturbing video shows a vehicle slam into a police officer. The suspect then jumps out and begins stabbing the officer before running off. 2 hours later, the suspect is spotted at a checkpoint in a moving van. He fled again, hitting 4 people before flipping the truck and being detained. The police officer was released from the hospital overnight. Authorities say an ISIS-type flag was found in that suspect's car. Meanwhile, in Marseille, France, 2 women were killed in a train station. One had her neck slit, the other was stabbed in the stomach, just 17 and 20 years old.
He attacked a woman who was sitting 5 to 6 meters away from me. It felt like a nightmare, and then started shouting, "Allahu Akbar, God is great."
That suspect then rushed at soldiers responding to the attack, who shot and killed him. ISIS is claiming responsibility for that attack. President Trump continues to praise the work of federal responders in Puerto Rico. FEMA approved more than $7 million in aid for the U.S. territory, and the Trump administration said it had more than 10,000 federal officials on the ground. As of Saturday, more than 45% of the island was without hot water, and many residents are still without power and other basic essentials.
We're getting a lot of things done, really at a record clip, so we're very happy with that, and I'll be going there on Tuesday.
President Trump has been criticized for his response to Hurricane Maria. He tweeted more than 20 times over the weekend to defend his response. President Trump says he believes, quote, tremendous progress is being made. He will head to the island 11 days after the storm hit. As you heard, he'll be there on Tuesday. The Supreme Court will begin its new term today. They are scheduled to deliberate over several high-profile cases dealing with controversial social issues this term, including the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Jack Phillips is the Christian owner of the Colorado Bakery. He refused to make a cake for a same-sex wedding, saying it conflicted with his religious beliefs. A political crisis in Spain after more than 2 million people voted in favor of declaring independence. Spain's top court declared the vote illegal. Police then proceeded to raid polling stations, drag away volunteers, and fire rubber bullets into the crowd that was gathered. More than 800 people were injured. The Catalan government is now calling on the European Union to respond. Spain's prime minister, however, remains defiant, saying in a televised speech, the self-determination or referendum in Catalonia didn't happen. 1 week ago, the Kurdish people went to the polls and overwhelmingly voted for independence. But as Chris Mitchell reports, their neighbors and the U.S. State Department opposed their dreams of a free and independent Kurdistan.
After the referendum, Turkey and Iraq joined forces for a military exercise on the border of Kurdistan. It served as a clear indication of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's disagreement with the vote.
The Kurdistan regional government has in fact thrown itself into the middle of the fire with its senseless attempt at independence. I don't accept anyone's independence.
Erdogan also threatened to cut off Kurdistan economically by stopping it from exporting oil and goods to the world. Then in Baghdad, the Iraqi government stopped international airlines from flying into the region's 2 international airports. That forced the evacuation of a number of NGOs.
Really sad, yes. I came here to try and make a difference to people living in an IDP camp, and I'm really heartbroken that I can't continue with them.
While that isolated the Kurds from much of the world, the U.S. piled on when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the U.S. does not recognize the Kurdistan regional government's unilateral referendum. The vote and the results lack legitimacy, and we continue to support a united, federal, democratic, and prosperous Iraq.
The Kurds are our greatest ally in the region.
Retired General Jay Garner says the Kurds earned the right for U.S. recognition.
And they fought with us in 2003. They held the line in 2014 when the Iraqi army fled, when our army ran. They held the line for over 2 years without us giving them much equipment, just as light infantry. And they held 1,000 kilometers of line against ISIS, and we don't recognize that now. They're our allies, the most pro-U.S. people in this region, and what we're doing now, we're punishing them.
He says the U.S. picked the wrong place to push away a close ally.
We ought to grab a friend where they can. This part of the world is not very friendly at all. But up here, these guys are real friends, and we ought to wrap our arms around them.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
America's defense secretary wants to build stronger military forces, but says there is something standing in his way. Coming up, our national security correspondent Eric Rosales breaks down the issue. The president says Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is wasting his time trying to negotiate with North Korea about its nuclear and missile programs. Saturday, Tillerson said the U.S. is maintaining direct channels of communications with North Korea and probing the North's willingness to talk. In response to the president tweeted saying, "Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done." Building a more lethal force, that's the military goal of Defense Secretary James Mattis, but he says political red tape puts his troops and our country at risk of an attack. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales explains.
The Secretary of Defense says he wants to regain the art of war fighting. Mattis told members of the Air Force Association the United States has no God-given right to victory on the battlefield, and we must adapt to survive.
Make no mistake that our adversaries are right now making concentrated efforts to erode our competitive edge. You know it, I know it, we can see it in the world around us.
The Secretary said outer space is a perfect example. At one time considered a sanctuary, it's now challenged like any battlefield. The Secretary said the same is true with cyberspace, with attacks taking place across the globe.
I believe the problem we face today is how do we maintain a nuclear deterrent and a decisive conventional force while maintaining irregular warfare as a core competency. Because the paradox of war is the adversary will always move against your perceived weakness.
Mattis says he's convinced a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent is the most critical piece of our nation's defense. In terms of damage to military readiness, Mattis says nothing has done more harm to it than continued resolutions and the lack of a predictable budget from Congress. Other military brass agree, like the commander of U.S. Strategic Command.
And in the media, I've been reported as I'm criticizing the acquisition process, or I'm criticizing the test process, or I'm criticizing the budget process. I'm criticizing every one of them, because it's the entire buying process that we have that is the problem.
General John Hyten says right now other countries like North Korea and Iran are spending money, lots of it, on their nuclear missile program. The general says the military saw rapid advancements in the U.S. Industrial Revolution during World War II, but now it's difficult to get things done on time and under budget, particularly because we're afraid to fail.
But when you fail, if you do it right, you go fast. And unfortunately, for the United States, our adversaries are doing that right now. They're going really fast, and we're not, and we have to change that.
The Department of Defense is poised to spend $400 billion in the next decade to modernize its nuclear arsenal. Some say the Pentagon needs to be realistic.
We can reduce that cost significantly by taking a second look at the number of nuclear weapons we need and looking at ways in which to save tens of billions of dollars by trimming or slowing or delaying some of these programs.
Daryl Kimball, Executive Director of Arms Control Association, says the Defense Department has other pressing issues like cybersecurity and the ongoing threat of terrorism.
There are a lot of responsibilities that we have. We need to rethink whether we need to maintain a Cold War-sized nuclear force that the Defense Department itself acknowledges is larger than necessary to deter other nuclear-armed actors.
The Senate has approved a defense policy bill that authorizes a $700 billion Pentagon budget. The measure passed even though lawmakers have yet to agree on a plan for waiving restrictions imposed by a 6-year-old law to control government spending. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead here on CBN Newswatch, this is a women's conference like you have never seen before. We're going to show you the event aimed at propelling women to lead. Stay with us. Women are uniting to worship and tap into their godly purpose. The Propel Women's Conference is taking over cities across America with familiar names in Christian leadership like Beth Moore and Lisa Bevere. Amber Strong takes us inside the unique women's ministry.
Not your grandmother's women's conference. Propel Activate is a day of worship, fun, and truth. And on this day, it brought hundreds of women from 19 states and 300 churches to Woodbridge, Virginia, seeking to tap into their passion, purpose, and potential. If you take a look behind me, you see women are lining up in large crowds of every age, of every different background, and they're here for two simple reasons: to be inspired and to learn God's calling for their life right here and right now.
We are in a fight. We do not battle against flesh and blood, but we fight against powers and principalities. We need to elevate this fight off people and get it onto the devil and begin to wield the weapon of our warfare, which is the Word of God.
Propel Activate conferences are popping up all over the U.S. It's not only for inspirational messages from leaders like Sarah Jakes Roberts, Beth Moore, and Lisa Harper. It's also to hear from ladies just like them, from homeschooling mothers to artists to record company executives. Propel co-founder Christine Kane says the idea formed when she noticed a generation of women slipping away.
And I began to see that we were starting to hemorrhage a generation of young women out of the church because we weren't really speaking to where they were at. We were speaking to only predominantly a stay-at-home mother, and yet there were young women that were going to college and were educated and were single for a lot longer, women that were single again. And I just started to think, you know what, we've got to not hemorrhage a generation to secular feminism, but we need to raise up a generation.
She says there is a whole group of women uniquely positioned to do good in God's kingdom.
And the Lord spoke to me out of Matthew chapter 9, where he said, pray to the Lord of the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers into the harvest. And that word send forth in the Greek is ekvalo, propel. And I felt just a prompting, and during my quiet time, Christine, I want you to propel women into the harvest field. And so many, they're in college and university, they're in the political sphere, they're doctors and they're lawyers and they're teachers and they're entrepreneurs. They're out there in the harvest. You need to equip them to be salt and light in the harvest field.
Propel women are greeted online and on social media with inspirational verses, videos, and articles. Kane hopes all Propel women, stay-at-home mom and corporate CEO alike, come away with a sense of unity and vigor for what they can accomplish.
Let's tear down walls and build bridges. And whether you are a stay-at-home homeschooling mother of 5 kids, or you're a corporate CEO or an entrepreneur or anything in between, let us cheer each other on and say God has gifted us all uniquely to reach our world in our generation, and let's be one another's greatest cheerleaders.
That message of passion, purpose, potential, and unity is spreading, one city at a time, one woman at a time. Amber Strong, CBN News in Woodbridge, Virginia.
And be sure to check out if that conference is coming near you. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Kenneth Drayton is in the business of sharing the gospel, and one day he hopes to do it from a pulpit. But for now, it's from the front seat of his car. Caitlin Burke takes a seat for the ride.
Hi, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Beautiful day in New York.
Kenneth Drayton drives for Uber in New York City. It's a part-time job that lets him practice his full-time calling.
Any believer, any spirit-filled believer, their number one priority is a commitment to the mission of God and to the purpose of God on a daily basis.
Kenneth says he's always been involved in ministry and hadn't really considered this other line of work.
My oldest son said, why don't you try, Dad, why don't you try Uber? You know, it's a pretty decent income, it's a pretty decent amount of money. And at the time I said, well, you know, I said, I don't know. But then I looked into it, and then what it required in New York City is you need a TLC license, Taxi Limousine Commission. And it was kind of an expensive process. But then one day I was eating in a buffet in Brooklyn, and a voice, I encountered in a voice that just said to me, go and get your TLC license. And it was clear, it was loud, and I looked around to see if anyone else in the buffet heard that. And it stood up in me. And I said, okay. I said, I perceive that this is the voice of the Lord speaking to me. So I obeyed.
After a year behind the wheel, he's pretty sure it was divinely appointed.
Many of them coming in and out of my car was perplexed, had issues, had concerns. And for some reason, I perceived that a lot of these individuals God was sending to me.
From the time a passenger slides into Drayton's back seat to the moment he drops them off, he says the Holy Spirit is present and guiding the conversation.
It's an awareness. It's an inner ear. It's wisdom, most of all. The Bible makes that clear also, that he that wins souls is wise.
Kenneth has no agenda other than obeying God. Sometimes that means talking to passengers. Sometimes that means staying silent. Either way, he trusts that the true winner of souls is at work.
God has many people working in the vineyards. So some water, some plants the seed, and depending on what the need is that God sees fit, and the Holy Spirit will determine how that seed grows.
Kenneth doesn't expect to be an Uber driver forever, but as of now, he hasn't been called to anything else.
I don't think Uber is the main focus. I think the main focus is God's divine will.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News, New York City.
Beautiful way to serve. Time now for your Monday motivation. Here's a thought to jumpstart what's already been a difficult week for so many. Kneel down to pray and then rise up knowing you have the power to face any challenge. In short, bow down while your knees still bend. The Master is indeed calling. With that word, make this a marvelous Monday and a wonderful week. That is a wrap for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. Take the time also to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. We'd love to hear from you. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, thank you so much for watching. We hope you'll join us again right here next time. It's Monday. Make it a marvelous one. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Goodbye and God bless.